and welcome to the Economic Times. I'm Surabhi Agarwal, and today we are discussing the proposed changes to the IT rules. The government last week proposed some new changes to the IT rules. These came within a year of the earlier amendments being notified and also implemented. To add more drama, the rules were pulled down within a few hours of them being published on the Ministry of Electronics and IT's website. Well, within a week, the rules were back again. But this time, the government provided an explanation of its intent behind these changes. To understand what these rules actually mean and how will they impact the end consumer as well as the ecosystem, we have today with us ET's Aashish, Aryan and Rekhi, who have been closely tracking this space. Welcome to the show, Aashish and Diya.
Thanks, Surabhi.
So starting with you, Aashish, could you explain to us what are these IT rules and what does the government have to say about them and who do they apply to?
In a nutshell, if one were to say, these rules define what social media intermediaries were, because there was no definition of what social media intermediaries are or even internet intermediaries are. What are their roles, what are their responsibilities, what rules do they have to follow, and so on and so forth. So social media intermediaries, what is the cutoff for becoming a significant social media intermediary? What are the rules that they have to follow? What happens if they don't follow those rules? And then, of course, we had provisions of these rules had provisions of asking them to appoint maybe a resident grievance officer or a resident nodal officer, and so on and so on.
Right. So thanks for that explanation, Aashish. Could you also tell us that what is the intent of the government behind bringing these rules?
The idea that the government has expressed so far is that when they introduced the rules in February of 2021, these rules were introduced for the first time, and then also the government had said that these rules would be dynamic, in the sense that these will have to be changed as and when time progresses and as and when internet itself progresses. So the way social media intermediaries interact with their users would change over time, the landscape would change over time. So that is one of the reasons why, when this draft was introduced, a draft for making amendments to the IT rules of 2021, the government said that over the time period between May and June this year, they noticed that there have been some gaps in the implementation of the rules itself, and as a result of which they have to introduce these amendments so that the big tech can properly follow, or the big tech or the gaps that they had identified so far. So those gaps could be addressed or redressed in a manner.
Coming to you, Diya, now, could you just talk a little bit about what are the big changes that have been proposed? Like, what are the big provisions that the government plans to either introduce or amend from its earlier version?
There are two big changes that they have proposed. The first one being that they are talking about having additional responsibility being given to the grievance redressal officers that these social media companies already have. So essentially, when there is a complaint from a user, the grievance officer looks into it and content is either taken down or, action is taken basis the complaint. So now, with additional responsibility being given, for instance, the timelines have also been crunched quite significantly. So now, if a user complains about certain content being, say, against the integrity of India, which is one of the broad concepts that is prevalent in the rules, then a grievance officer has to look into it and take some action within 72 hours. Now, this is a huge difference from the current rules, wherein a grievance officer can take up to 15 days. So between 15 days and 72 hours, you can see it's a huge sort of change that they've brought in to speed up the process. The second one, which most people are taking very positively to, is the constitution of an appellate tribunal. Now, the government is putting in place a body to look into grievance redressal mechanisms that these social media companies have. So if I'm an aggrieved user, right now, my only way for some kind of legal recourse is to send my complaint to the court or to file a case in court, which ends up burdening the entire judicial system, which is already overburdened. Now, with this new appellate tribunal, if I feel I have been, like, something I have posted has been taken down wrongfully, or I have been banned from a social media app, I can now go to this appellate tribunal, which is going to be constituted by the government, and have them look into that. Now, this government body can review and even veto decisions that social media companies have taken in terms of their decisions.
How are the companies or the experts taking these proposed changes? What are they saying? Have they flagged any concerns? And what are the big challenges that they see when it comes to these guidelines?
From the lawyers I spoke to, most of them said that, see, there can be aggressive takedown of content in order to ensure that it doesn't reach a point where it needs to go to an appellate tribunal, for example. So they are saying that grievance officers may interpret the terms very broadly and take down content aggressively in order to not get into any kind of tussle with the government. So that's the first thing. Second is, I think when you have self-regulation, which is what has been the case so far, a lot of people have had issues with self-regulation, right? But now with the government coming in, there's also a concern that will the government sort of control the social media narrative, and will there be so much control from the government coming in, which will ensure that, it's not as free as maybe we think it is right now. That's third, I think, would be, I mentioned that time frame, right? 15 days to 72 hours, it's a huge shift. And that is something that, even social media companies are saying, we don't know how we're going to deal with the inflow of requests that we get, and, turning out that kind of decision making so quickly. One of the things that has been brought up is that when you have government bodies that oversee things, that whole question of freedom of social media companies and so on is under a question mark at that point, because will they take down something that they feel is anti-government or something like that? So a lot of mixed reactions, I feel, but as we get a little closer to understanding the fine print, I think a lot of detail gets missed out with the fine print. So I think that's what everyone is waiting for and hoping that there will be more clarity that the government provides, because at this point people are saying it's too broad and too far-reaching, which is one of the issues that has been flagged.
Thanks, Dia. Aashish, I will now come to you, and you speak to a lot of the big tech companies. What is it that they feel about these rules? I think there was some talk of having a self-appointed, I think, grievance redressal body as well. What is the industry's reaction to that?
The sense that I'm getting is that while they welcome that there is a sort of interaction or a stakeholder consulting that the government is doing this time around, because that was one of their complaints when the IT rules of 2021 were brought in, that it was an old IT rule which is put in in cold storage, and suddenly you dust it up and you bring those rules. So that part they are fairly satisfied with, that at least there is a stakeholder consultation that is going on. The people have been asked to submit their views on it within 30 days of these rules being published, and then of course there will also be a town hall sort of a meeting or a open house discussion on where these stakeholders can come and give their views. What they're still wary of is that because the ideas of say an appellate body or the community guidelines or how content is taken down is so different when it comes to the big tech companies and the government, that they fear that at the end of the day, because the government has those powers, it can always say that despite the best efforts that the industry made, we are not satisfied that the industry regulated body is really the right forum to become a appellate tribunal, and therefore they fear that this could at the end of the day become just a idea that is never seen on paper. And the government has assured them that this is not a static law, This will always be a dynamic law. This will always be work in progress.
So, what is the way ahead for this? What is the government's thought process in terms of now these rules are just proposed, right? How are they going to go about consultation with the industry? What is the way ahead here?
So they have already put out the draft paper on their website, and they have invited the stakeholders to submit all their comments and give all their ideas on what more changes could be proposed. And there is an open house discussion, of sorts also being organized maybe later this week or the next week itself, where the government will invite, of course, stakeholders, the big tech companies, the tech policy groups, the cyber security experts. Even the government is even saying that we'll invite the common citizen also to come and express their views on what more changes could be done, or the changes that have been proposed. How can they, fine tune it, or is there a better proposal that could come that could in a way ensure that these IT rules are written or are rewritten in a more compact and comprehensive manner. And then of course the government hopes that once these consultations are done, they plan to bring out the IT rules as soon as July, which is like just about 15 days from now.
So, given the significance that these rules have and the impact they will have on common users like you and me consuming the internet, and the impact that they will have again on the big tech companies as well as the Indian startups, I think this is going to be a very interesting space to watch. Thanks for joining, and thanks for watching.